The amazing Afua Hirsch. Welcome.
Good evening. Wow, this is a rowdy audience. And we were just saying it's a bit like Black Church. Welcome. I am genuinely humbled, actually, by the panel that is with me today. So can I ask you all to come up and take your seats? I'll introduce you one by one, but you can already see this is actually the dream dinner party over which to discuss the question of whether the next James Bond should be black. Is this something you guys have actually found yourselves discussing? Can you raise your hand if you've ever had a conversation about whether, it really gets into that thing that we think about. Thank you, I appreciate that. So, let's start with you, Clint. Clint Dyer, award-winning film, television, and theatre director and deputy artistic director of the Royal National Theatre. He recently directed Get Up, Stand Up. Thank you. As well as the widely anticipated Death of England for the National Theatre. He starred on stage in the National Theatre's Olivier-winning production of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, directed by Dominic Cooke, for which he won Best Actor. Next to Clint, Adjoa Andoh, my Ghanaian sister, or auntie I should say really, award-winning film, television and stage actor. I know you know her as Lady Danbury. I know you do, and for that she won Outstanding Supporting Actress at the 2021 NAACP Image Awards. But it's super important for me to say that Adjoa has had a decades-long career of incredible roles, of really shining the light for us as Black British people in your outstanding performances, constantly supporting other Black creatives. I have been watching and admiring you for as long as I can remember. And your other roles notably include your Hollywood debut in 2009, starring alongside Morgan Freeman, and Matt Damon in Clint Eastwood's biographical sports film Invictus. And this was a big moment for me, in 2019 you conceived, co-directed and played Richard II at Shakespeare's The Globe Theatre, the UK's first all women of colour production. Thank you for joining us, Adjoa. Next to me is the phenomenal Nova Reid. Acclaimed, thank you. Acclaimed thought leader, TED speaker, author, producer, all-round phenomenal human. Through her impactful advocacy and powerful public speaking, writing and storytelling, Nova has become renowned as an agent of change, selected as one of Black Magic Network's top 100 Black British women, and receiving a Precious Award for social impact. Her best-selling debut book, The Good Ally, has won acclaim around the world and is also for sale in the bookshop upstairs, should you find yourselves there after this event. Thank you, Nova. We also have with us Andrew Odom. It's great to have you, Andrew. Creator Communities Lead at YouTube, EMEA, responsible for implementing strategic initiatives to accelerate the representation of historically marginalized communities. And in his role, he manages the YouTube Black Voices Fund, which empowers hundreds of creators to celebrate Black joy and elevate authentic stories on the platform. Thank you again for joining me, Andrew. Last, but I promise you in advance, no means least, not least from conversations I've already had with Harry. Harry Sewell, writer, speaker, ambassador of Visionary Arts UK, you just heard about before I came on, who's a specialist in social justice, equality, race and culture in mental health. Harry is an honorary senior visiting fellow at the University of Central Lancashire and guest lecturer at the University of Bradford and at Christ Church, Canterbury University. Thank you for joining us, Harry. So, Adjoa. Should the next James Bond be black?
Honestly, I don't care.
Curveball.
Sorry, I don't care. Why don't I care? I suppose because there are so many stories that we can be telling. Being an undercover operative of the state that has oppressed us for how many centuries may be his bag as a black James Bond, but there may be other ways of telling exciting stories as well. So, yeah, I always feel diverted by that question. I feel diverted away from fundamental questions about power, the dissemination of information, gatekeepers, who commissions, who tells the story, all those sorts of things. So this is my controversy. Here's a little for me. Has anyone seen The Woman King?
Yes.
So for me, there was a difference between The Woman King and Black Panther.
Oh, absolutely.
And for me, the difference was there were an elite crack troupe of women, elite guards for the king in the Dahomean people, and we have so many stories to tell. I want to see all of the stories. So yes, you can have a black James Bond, but let's also have other stories of people of colour being extraordinary in ways that we don't get to see.
But Adjoa, the way you tell it, should we even be participating in a franchise like James Bond, given the opportunity?
I think we should put ourselves everywhere. Unless it's a franchise, well, gosh, I mean, every franchise is doing something heinous at some level that we may not know about. So that's just a given of living in the West in the 21st century, or actually anywhere in the world in the 21st century. But I think we have the right to choose to place ourselves wherever we want. The point is the right to choose, that we choose to do what we choose to do. And some people will want to be in a franchise like that, and some people will be wanting to do something slightly more out of straightforward sync. Whichever you choose, just have the choice. Choice, that's the point. But for too long, we've been marginalised, stuffed in corners, told to respond in this way, told to be grateful, not given the space to be creative, free-thinking, demanding, challenging. And we are all those things, and we should just have the opportunity to put our energies and our gifts and our talents wherever we choose to put them. That's my big thing.
Thank you. Clint, I guess what Adjoa was saying really goes to the heart of representation as a focus of our energy. Is it a red herring?
So I suppose for me, I absolutely agree with everything you've said. For me, yes, it's a red herring, but I suppose what we're really talking about is mainstream, aren't we? So we're talking about us being able to have our stories and our stories seen and accepted and understood and made to the real issues, is the work being made, the opportunity. And so I'm really always torn by this conversation, because me as an artist that makes the work, there's a fundamental flaw inside something that is based in such, trying to hit such a commercial target. So it is probably the biggest franchise, isn't it? Right. So for me, I always kind of go, okay, so what, are we going to say that Bond is now colourless? I remember seeing this comedian, I'm not going to do the joke, I'm just going to tell you kind of what he said. And he kind of related this notion that isn't it impossible for him to really be black and do the things that James Bond does, because everybody would know it's the black guy. Because the context, right? Because the context we build in this make-believe film has to be, for me as an artist, hold some form of truth. So for me, it's always the challenge is, will you have a black writer? If you have a black writer, how will that change the commercial aspects of it and benefit the commercial aspects of it? How will that underwrite the experience of this, if he is the lone black man in this society, which he usually is? All right, there's usually a couple of absolutely beautiful black women that they've now decided to put into the franchise as well. But we kind of recognise the setup that it's usually a white world. Yeah, do we kind of agree with that? So for me as an actor, I've always gone, well, he's got to be a black man. He can't be somebody who is just saying the lines that a white person would say and is interchangeable. That for me I find controversial. Now, that said, and this is why I keep going flip, flat with it. So you have a play that's coming onto the West End, it might be on right now, with the amazing David Harewood in it. And it's called Best of Enemies. And all right, I'm going to tell you the whole story. So the director asked me to be in it, not playing that part, but playing somebody else. And he then said he's going to cast this very well-known racist as a white, as a black man. American racist as a black man. When I say racist, you know, it's set in the 1960s. He's a journalist and interviewer, and he's on the wrong side of history, let's put it that way. And they cast David Harewood. I love David Harewood. I think he's amazing. So I go and see this thing, and I'm kind of like, I know this is going to mess with me because I just don't believe in it. And when Jeremy Herring told me that he was going to cast a black person, I said to him, "Why?" He said, "Oh, I think it'll be fun." I said, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to be in it. I'm not going to be in it. I'm not going to be in it. Now, I went to see it, and of course, it's brilliant. David Harewood is smashing it. And then you get into the argument, which obviously is the argument that I grew up with, which is about opportunity. So it's all about opportunity, you could argue, for me as a young actor. It was just, I want the fucking chance. Oh, sorry, so I want the chance. I want the chance. It's about opportunities. The key thing is about us being able to have a chance at doing it, to show what we can do. Because when you have the more experiences you have, the better you become. That's just fact. So you kind of get into this thing where you kind of go, oh, but David's now a better actor for doing it. We've all now seen David Harewood in a completely different light, and now he's reached the stratosphere because it's such a fine performance. So I'm talking.
There are so many great points that you raised there, but one reminds me of another David Harewood story. David's not here, so we won't make this the David Harewood panel. But he played in the, I think, early 90s in a black theatre production, a play where he played a character at a time when there was less representation than there is now. He played a character that was really a real baddie, who was kind of villainous throughout the play, who was also gay, who was kind of messing with both sexes in married couple relationships, just doing all kinds of things that people weren't used to seeing black people doing. And he felt that there was a form of respectability politics among black audiences, that they weren't willing to tolerate seeing a black actor playing a gay man, playing a villain, and that he felt creatively curtailed in that. So it also raises interesting questions about whether we are genuinely giving ourselves permission to have the same interesting gamut of roles as white actors don't hesitate to take on. One of the things I want to pick up, and I'm coming to you, Andrew, is the question of, in your story, Clint, I feel as if the fact that it was a white person casting that was part of your...
Yeah, maybe.
Had it been a black person who was doing it out of some curiosity from the black experience, would you have had a different...
Well, obviously, I think if it was a black person casting it, they'd probably be trying to say something by doing it.
Not just, I thought it'd be fun.
I thought it'd be fun. Can't hear you. Sorry.
I want to bring in Andrew because I think this conversation often ends up being about gatekeepers. And that's shorthand, I guess, for the commissioners in some respects, the people making the decisions about what gets made and what gets funded, which you are now in the happy position of being among. So as somebody who has that power, How are you navigating these questions of representation?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think to your point, I would love us to kind of explore the kind of balance between escapism and art as a form of escapism, and then it reflecting the genuine context in which we live in. And I think it is about opportunity, it is about choice, but it's also about intention. And I think it's really important that we think about who is in the room making these decisions. Are they simply using Black voices as a means to an end or as a tool to just be provocative? And I think that strips Black people from how human they can truly be and the multifaceted nature of us as us and our stories. But for me, representation, I think gatekeepers play a huge role in representation, especially in the UK. I'd actually like to discuss like a personal story. So I grew up in Stevenage. I was one of very few Black gay people, or at least openly Black gay people within the town. I grew up in a school of over 1,500 students. I was one of only 5 Black people within that school. Very much so that I didn't see myself reflected in media. And I actually want to lament on a quote by Junot Diaz where he said, in order to turn people into monsters, you deny them of their reflection, you deny them of the ability to see themselves within cultural media. And I felt like a monster. I felt like the only Black gay, not even in the village, but in the world, Little Britain. But yes, and I remember watching YouTube and seeing, I think it was the year of 2011. Can you tell me what happened in 2011? Anyone want to hazard a guess?
The riots?
No, Beyonce dropped Who Run the World, girls.
I prefer that reference.
Get with it. Come on.
And I remember watching these 3 Black British men, and they were doing a review of like Who Run the World Girls, and I was like, let me see what the real tea is. What does everyone think about Who Run the World Girls? And they were acting very differently. I'd never seen Black men act that way. And it wasn't until I joined a dating site later, I actually found out that they were, of course, gay. I actually befriended one of them. And he introduced me to Patrick Ian Polk's work, Noah's Ark, which is this incredible series. It explores Black queer men in all of our multifaceted kind of our expressions, how we navigate love, how we navigate friendships, how we navigate our careers. And in that moment, I really felt validated. So for me, representation, kind of seeing that within traditional media and also seeing that on social media, and the fact that we have the ability to build our own platforms, to garner audiences ourselves through social media and prove the value of our stories. And I think that has really democratized the power dynamics that you see within the media industry. And for me, that's what representation means. I think gatekeepers has less power. We're able to tell our own stories and really fill the gap in terms of what representation means to us. So yeah.
Thank you. Should the next James Bond be Black?
If it's Idris Elba, then... No, I think why not? At the end of the day, James Bond is a fictional character. I think we've seen a lot of conversations, particularly with iconic fictional characters such as The Little Mermaid. We saw all of the conversations happening there. In terms of Doctor Who, and I think as long as the character's race isn't integral to the story or the plot of that fictional character, we should absolutely take an inclusive approach to casting for that character. But again, it's about opportunity, it's about choice, it's about the intentions, who's in the room, what is the vision for the character, and does the actor embody the nature of that character. And I think for James Bond, he's quintessentially British, but then we get onto the conversation around what is considered quintessentially British and what does the role of race play within what is considered British. So I know you're an expert on that, so I'm gonna...
Well, Harry, there's almost an argument there that having a Black James Bond normalizes the idea that a quintessential Englishman is a Black man. Is that not helpful?
Well, I think it's really problematic when we have established norms created around whiteness, which we then just seek to switch and then locate a Black face. And unconsciously, what it communicates is that the epitome of success, that the best, the most prestigious, is whiteness, and therefore we should be aspiring to that. So if you kind of think about jazz artists like Coltrane, my hero, or Charlie Parker, their albums, when they played with strings, was kind of seen as them elevating their art form to another level, because of course their unconscious connection with Western classical music being the benchmark for what is kind of supremacy in the art form. So I think it's highly problematic. I also think that the franchise itself is pretty solid when you kind of think beyond the racial paradigm. If you think about gender politics, for example, there's a lot of misogyny, there's a lot of sexism in the character, the whole idea of what James Bond represents. And as Audre Lorde said, there's no single issue politics because we don't live single issue lives. And I think, particularly when we critique it from a gender perspective, we have to say, well, are we then just going to put a black person within a context which is highly problematic in the first place? And if we're seeking transformation, should we not be asking the fundamental question about whether or not this franchise is helpful in the first place? I mean, finally, I'll just say, if you want to kind of understand what I'm talking about, when we talk about gender equality, for example, we say, okay, we want many more women in politics. But actually, we've got systems of politics which are corrupted. And I don't just mean taking back handers. I mean the kind of working patterns that destroy families and all of that. And is equality about, we want to be able to do what the men do, to kind of never be at home and have lots of affairs and drink loads in the bars? And it's actually, we need reframing and to restructure our systems. And I think with regard to the next James Bond just stepping in, a black person stepping in to a frame which isn't actually that beneficial, I kind of think, no. I guess also the proximity to the uprisings following the murder of George Floyd, I think, because the question, if you look at it, should the next? And I think absolutely, definitely not, before you ask the follow-up question. Absolutely not, because of the proximity to the uprisings following the murder of George Floyd, because people reframe it as a reactionary move, and therefore it then finds a get out for people doing the internal work to say, well, actually, why do we even need to consider this? They can just write it off to say, oh yeah, of course they would, wouldn't they, because of Black Lives Matter. So absolutely not.
I feel like the metaphor of having a woman prime minister doesn't improve outcomes for women is apt at this moment in time.
For real.
Nova, you've done such amazing work on anti-racism and whiteness. And listening to Harry, it strikes me this is also about a question of, is having a black James Bond really just a form of assimilating a black actor into whiteness, into a white idea? Is that how you see this question?
Yeah, everything that came out of Adjoa's mouth was the same. I don't care enough, and actually what's going on underneath that, what's going on behind the scenes, who's producing, who's directing, who are the studio engineers, who's the team behind it. And so to me, one, I don't care enough, and two, it's more important for us to be platforming stories that are led by us. And I'm taking into consideration what Hari said as well about the roles, but on the other hand, it's acting and it's make-believe. And so I think, what happened with Woman King recently was there was some vitriol on social media around the historical significance of the Dahomey Kingdom and their role in the transatlantic slave trade. And the response to that was you have all this hoop jumping that Viola Davis had to go through to get the film commissioned in the first place. And then there's this burden and this shoulder that black creatives end up having to hoop jump and suddenly be the storyteller of all of the things that have gone on historically and tell things accurately in something that is make-believe. So yes, it was inspired by and it's partially true, but it's allowing people to be creative. So I feel often that when we have the chance to be creative and tell our stories, there is this disproportionate burden that we need to then educate, because there is such a thirst and a lack of stories that are historically significant, and we're missing it, we're lacking it, and so then it gets in the way of how we create. So to me, again, it's down to opportunity, and I don't think that plonking a black person in a role that's been aligned with white norms is actually helpful, because it also delegitimizes the talent of the black creative, because then it's seen as a diversity hire. And then you're not seen as, you continue to perpetuate the cycle of not being seen as a full human being and this talented actor that white peers, they don't have to navigate this stuff on top. I was listening to Lashana Lynch, who played 007, interestingly, and also is in The Woman King. And someone asked her a question around the lines of, what's it like to be a black woman in The Woman King, and to have lots of people around you who look like you? And her answer to that was, it's amazing, it's incredible, but actually what was more breathtaking for her was the fact that you go on set, it's a black director who's considered your needs as a black woman, who's considered the hair, so the head of costume and wigs is a black woman, the head of makeup is a black woman. And it was only in being in this experience that she realised that has never happened to her before. And she's a distinguished actress where she has not been considered, and you have to expend energy advocating for yourself and making sure you get what you need to do your job. And so for me, the behind the scenes is much more important, because then you can just come and do your work, and how you show up is a lot more powerful, because you're not having to do all the expend energy on dealing with the everyday bits of racism. So I hope I've answered the question.
Yeah.
I go off on tangents.
And I'm thinking of you, Adjoa, because you've been obviously front of camera, but also involved in productions, and all women of colour productions, but also appearing in productions that aren't run by black people.
So I've got a production company called Swinging the Lens, because I am interested, I want to move the lens. I want to talk, who's that woman that's just come in the back with the tea tray? I want to know about her story. I mean, there isn't anyone there, but I'm just saying. It's acting, darling. But I want to know her story. I'm not interested in the posho she's brought the tea for. I want to know, how is she feeling? Is she tired? What's her favourite smell? What does she think of these people? Her job? I want to know about us from the inside. And that might be race, it might be class, it might be gender, it may be sexuality, it may be differently abled people. I want to know the whole of who we are. So to what you were just saying, Nova, when we did Richard II, I paused there because I'm doing Richard III next year, and I'm doing it in an all-white cast, because I'm going to replicate my childhood in the Cotswolds. You want to talk about body pathologizing? Woo, let me tell you. With Richard II, I said I want it to be an all-women production of colour, and that's every woman: the fight director, the voice coach, the costume supervisor, the lighting designer, the composer, all the musicians. Bernadine Evaristo wrote the programme notes. I mean, everybody was a woman of colour. I don't run the Globe, so the whole building wasn't women of colour. And we had a day, what I call a cultural sharing day, where I just said to everybody, come in, bring something that you respond to about the play, a piece of fabric, a cake, a dance routine, a film clip, a song, whatever it is, a memory. And we all wept all day, because we all had the story of the relief of not being the only one in the room. And for me, it speaks to what Harry was saying as well about when you stick yourself in this corrupted structure. For me, when I started out I came up to London, I did my first job here in 1984. It was an all-black women show. It was written by a black woman. It was directed by an Armenian woman. And we did it at the Drill Hall, Blessed Theatre of Our Memory in the middle of London, no longer open. This is 1984. If you go online, you will never find anything about that play, because the internet does not look backwards. So I have a real thing at the moment where I want us to know the shoulders we stand on, so we stop reinventing the wheel and move on to nuclear fusion or wind power or whatever. So my request to you, Mr. YouTube, my friend, would be to say all our shit and all our achievements needs to be where people can access it. I was just saying earlier, the show I'm doing at the moment, my driver is a beautiful young man in his 30s, Jamaican heritage, never heard of Spike Lee. No, he's a switched-on young man. We forget how quickly this stuff moves. And if we're not archiving it... I mean, Spike Lee, the cinematography of that man, the way he would light a scene, the shots that he invented that hadn't been done before. Because
the stories.
Well, the stories, the documentaries, the aesthetic, the politics, everything. For a young man in his 30s in London, not to know that all that is there for him. Another thing, online, I don't know why I keep saying, you're not all of online.
You're to blame.
Hey, forgive me, brother. I do loads of audiobooks, right? And obviously, because I'm Ghanaian heritage and I can do all different accents, I get all the brown books. And you go online and you want to do a Hungarian accent. You can go pronunciation, blah, 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 and you can find it. You go online and you want to do anything, from the Asian subcontinent, anything from the African, you cannot find the voices. So you'll ring, Auntie, can you just read this for me, please? Or whatever it is. We need access all areas for our creativity and our work. And we have to bring everything that we have learned and been nurtured by in our lives and the people that have gone before us. So, when I came to London, I did this job with Deborah John Wilson, Where Do I Go From Here, the play was called. And then I cleaned toilets and did modelling for life drawing classes for a year and lived in a squat in Brixton. I was 21, it was marvellous. I wasn't in the Cotswolds. But it was other black actresses who told me about auditions. So they put themselves at a disadvantage for my advantage. And I've never forgotten the generosity of freelance people on their uppers doing that for me. And we have to pass it on. We have to open the doors. If you're in a job and you have any power, you have to try and push those doors. I mean, you don't have to, but I feel beholden. It feels like my duty for all the people that can't and survive and try to thrive and try to be generous to others, that we, where's Paul? When I was doing the Mandela film and we went to Robben Island, it's the lime quarry. It's all the political prisoners in that place where they eat their lunch and they shit and they stay out of the sun. Each one, teach one. That's why South Africa's got one of the best constitutions in the world, because all those thinkers, those radically open-minded people who wanted to shift things, they got together and they all shared the conversation with each other. But we have to start thinking about the structures. It's like when people go, they come over here, they take my job, because it's so much easier to say that than to say, why is the employer paying that low wage? What is capitalism doing for me? What is it doing to us as our souls and our time and our society? We got to sort of think wider, and we have to stay alert. And we have to stay alert in love and joy. I think about Tutu. I'll shut up. I think about Tutu and the Truth and Reconciliation Committee and the magnificent, horrible work they had to do. And I think about the joy of that man. And I just think, when people say the best revenge is to live well, well, the best revenge is to live well. To live in joy. To support each other, to be in solidarity, to be alert, to not be accepting, to not accept the brown window dressing that happens so often. We need to be in the back office deciding what's going in the window.
Thank you, Adjoa. I have to say, when I listen to you and when I read Bernardine Evaristo and Jackie Kay, I feel like this window into this world in the 80s.
We were all there. We were at the We Are Here conferences in 1983 and 1984.
I can't help but feel we must have gone so far backwards from then that we're trying to get back to it. Clint, I want to ask you about that, because you've been in this industry for a minute as well. In the best
what you mean. Well, it's a fascinating thing, isn't it? The notion that progress, that we're at the best time. What we find is we're always at the best time it's ever been. And or a breakthrough is the biggest breakthrough there's ever been. When I grew up, and I was saying this earlier, that Rudolph Walker, does anybody know who Rudolph Walker is? Yeah. Right, so Rudolph Walker, I remember about 10, 15 years ago, I watched Rudolph Walker playing a detective like a James Bond character, young, handsome, and it was like, I was something like, 20 odd, something like that, and it was just like, I'd never seen anything near that. I mean, literally, like, it couldn't, this was a mirage. Did I dream this? And the notion that we are so excited sometimes, and sometimes it feels justified, but we're so excited of what's happening now, and we just don't hold up the things that have happened before. So we actually put ourselves at a disadvantage. Yes, there was lots of politically leaning work in the 80s and 90s, more my time. But we undoubtedly have more, there's more of us now. There just literally is more of us. And like you, and there was a group of black actors that we used to ring up each other, and you know, the agents used to get pissed off with us because we'd have to.
Have you heard about this?
Have you heard about it? And you turn up, you just turn up at the audition. Because your friend told you. But what I was saying before, I mean, there's a thing now where we collectively have so much more power than we used to. And this is because of the internet. It is because of the social networks that we can use. I made a film called Sus. Low budget film that did very well. But I know that the reason it did well was because of Facebook. And I'll never ever forget, and it's actually still quite touching to me, that when I went onto Facebook, everybody put the picture of Sus as their image. And it just scrolled up, and it was just like loads and loads and loads of, and that was collective power. You know, it made the BBC put it on again. It made the BBC buy it. And so there's a I think we forget our ability to make things happen for ourselves. And I suppose in answer to the James Bond and to where we were in the 90s and to where we are now, there's such a desperate desire to be the one that makes it, as opposed to the collective that makes it. And that's what we had back in the day. Mm-hmm. I felt like we were much more rooted in a scenario that meant that we went forward, as opposed to one went forward. And it's no disrespect to anybody that is the soul out there or doing it out there, but it's just, that's what I feel we've lost.
That almost makes it sound like the more opportunities very gradually begin to open up in mainstream white space projects, in a way it has the negative repercussion of distracting us from organising the kind of collectives that and maybe I'm romanticising it, but from what I hear about the 80s and how organised black women were, and gay black women and radical black women, these collectives and squats and community theatre companies that still exist, but not as, it doesn't feel like they have the same, then it feels like then they were the only outlet for these ideas, whereas now the opportunities are beginning to be dispersed in the mainstream.
Well, it's the tyranny of integration, isn't it?
Yes.
Thanks for dropping that in casually. Yes, it is.
It's weird, isn't it? Because you want it, but oh God, the cost is we leave ourselves out of the frame.
Andrew, I was listening to Adjoa talking about living well as a form of rebellion and black joy. And looking at the YouTube Black Voices Fund, which I have done in some detail, there is a real emphasis on black joy. And I'm so curious about that. And I guess for two reasons. I mean, one, I'm curious why you are centering black joy and what the story is. But also, is there a danger, because I've heard this not from you, but from commissioners, after George Floyd's murder, everyone wanted black pain. Oh my God, racism exists, we want black pain. Then there was this backlash where black people said, you know, we're not walking targets of racism, we exist as humans, we have experiences and lives and dreams. And then it was like, oh my God, these people have joy. Let's commission black joy. It feels as if the industry has a way of even taking the most important things and simplifying them into something problematic. So how do you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think definitely when we set up the fund back in 2020, there was a real sense of collective black trauma that I'm sure and many of us in this room felt. And we really wanted to reflect the times and ensure that the teams that were working on the fund were truly reflective of our Black employees, but then also understanding kind of what the sentiment was externally and ensuring that we were commissioning bodies of work that were reflective of the conversations that we're having. So we did work very closely with an internal steering committee to ensure that the stories that we were championing were reflective of what was going on in the world. But then, as you said, there was very much a shift towards the more joyful stories and the more joyful narratives around the Black experience sometime after, I think, when things started to open up and we were back outside. Yeah, we're outside. There was very much a shift towards narratives around Black joy, I think, to almost counteract the centering of Black trauma that was kind of very much frequently seen within the media, within the conversations that I was having within the community. So we do also just really try to just have a diverse roster of creators that we have on the program, ensuring that we reflect diverse stories. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think we do just want to reflect the times and reflect the sentiment that we are seeing in the conversations that we're seeing. And naturally, creators tend to do that themselves because they're obviously a product of their communities, they're a product of their experiences, but we're not a monolith. So, yeah, I think it's just ensuring we have a diverse group of people that are commissioning those stories internally as well and kind of acting as that steering guide for the program.
Thank you. And Nova, I'm curious about your work because, and I know this from personal experience as well, when you do anti-racism work, you're necessarily educating people about Black trauma and about the systemic issues and how they manifest in the Black experience. How do you protect yourself? Because that's very draining. And, you know, as Andrew's saying, I think many of us felt exhausted by the conversations around trauma and combined with the experience of trauma in the last few years. And do you think that centering Black joy is important objectively?
I will start with how I look after myself. Thank you for asking that question. And it was draining. Just to give context around that time, I, on average, would get about 800 hits to my website a month. And within 24 to 48 hours of the news hitting around the murder of George Floyd, that increased to 40,000. And I had this there was just this insatiable appetite and very reactive, give me all the stuff. How can you educate me? How can I align yourself? How can I align myself with you? So even in that context, I still wasn't being treated like a full human being because the Inquirer was about what can I get from you? And it wasn't a usual business inquiry. There's a clear difference for me. What can I get from you to alleviate some of this guilt that I'm feeling? Rather than, I'm aware of what's going on in the world and how more and more people, radio hosts like Clara Amfo breaking down on the air, live on air, it was everywhere. Rather than thinking, okay, you're a Black woman, are you okay? And so one of the ways I look after myself is very firm boundaries. I have support. And just in terms of my day-to-day, I have some people who volunteer for me who are white, and they will go in my inbox first. They will clear out the BS. They will clear out the BS on social media so that I'm not always ingesting it.
I love that model.
It's great.
I learned something.
But it's reparative as well. I'm teaching, you know, I talk about anti-racism, but actually I'm talking about collective healing and how we better treat one another with basic dignity, care and respect, and reciprocal rather than this extraction and this capitalist nature of give me something, what can I get from you? How can I feast on you? And so I'm teaching people how to practice just caring for one another better. So what do you need? What do you need right now? And so I have that kind of support, boundaries around contact hours. I have a rest day on a Wednesday, and that means as much as I can, I'm not working. Sometimes I'm in my dressing gown all day. I'm not online. It's hard. It's very hard. And so just those intentional moments for rest every week, not just when I'm burned out or towards the end of a year when I can have a nice treat and a holiday. And I do things that nourish me I used to do Wing Chun until till lockdown. But Tai Chi, I'm very mindful of what I put in my body. I'm very iron deficient, so I eat foods that are iron rich. I'm very intentional. I think that's so important that we, the work that I'm doing is around addressing the dehumanization. My work centers anti-blackness, but obviously black people aren't the only people who experience systemic harm. But I'm intentionally thinking, well, I'm doing the work around undoing the dehumanization of black people and how some of that we've internalized as well. So what can I do where I am really intentional about loving on myself, about taking care of myself, about not having autonomy over my body and noticing my urges when I need to go to the toilet and not overriding and working and going through. So I'm very intentional with myself and also who I work with. And I'm very playful. Somebody was just miffed yesterday that I was 41 years old. They're like, I can't believe it. I thought you were in your 20s. I'm like, no. But I'm very playful. I'm quite young at heart anyway. My husband and I have got a great, very cheeky banter, always laughing. I dance, I sing, all these things that allow me to be a full human being because I'm often at the center of where my world is reduced to blackness or just skin colour. What was the second part of the question? I knew this.
I'm gonna evolve the second part of the question because bringing it back also to this world of entertainment and film, how much does it matter to you in the work that you're doing, the outcomes you want to see? Does representation in popular culture make a difference to that work? Does it make a difference to you?
It does to me. So I have lineage lost to slavery. It matters how I'm portrayed. It matters how, it matters the stories that are told about us that don't continuously contribute to dehumanizing. I also in a former life, I used to be an actress. I was an actress, working hard to be an actress for just under a decade before I moved into mental health and the work that I do now. And it matters, but it can't just be on its own. We've seen with the buffoonery going on in the government that you can have representation all you like, but if you haven't got, if the integrity isn't there, if the curiosity around values and a shared goal isn't there, then it can actually be really harmful. And also, in terms of the arts, if you're just plonking black people in roles that are aligned or historically aligned with white norms, or even not, what are these commissioners, directors, writers, production houses doing to protect the mental health of the black actors who are then receiving death threats and abuse on social media because they've been cast in a role, because they're not experiencing the same moment of joy and celebration that their white peers are experiencing. They're having to come offline. They're having to manage their mental health. So the people who are also casting in these roles need to think about how they can protect the talent, their psychological safety, because we exist in a world currently in the West where not everybody's happy about the advancements in representation. And so thinking about that is key for me as well.
Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
I'm going to give you guys a chance to ask questions in a moment. But before I do, Harry, I want to come to you to ask you, I'm asking you this because I know you can handle it. I think we've identified the problem with tokenism, with the Black James Bond. But what does progress look like to you? What would you like to see differently?
I think often the debate focuses on the other. Should we have a Black James Bond or, any version of that story? And it centers the struggle as opposed to centering the work to be done by the oppressor or the oppressive system. So when I talk about transformation, it isn't just about transforming ourselves as people of color, but actually how we can decolonize the institutions, the systems within which we work. And so in an ideal world, we would be spending more time thinking about what we need to do to remove the problem in the first place. What is it about the industry that means that we've had the patterns that we've had over the past decades and years? That would be the focus of attention. Because To have a black James Bond, for example, is setting up an individual to experience two things. One is the wrath and the critique that that performance wasn't good enough. No matter how good it wasn't going to be like Sean Connery. And it's going to get nasty. So there's that. But also the cost of code switching and what it means to place yourself in an environment where you have to deny yourself. Frantz Fanon wrote his book, what was published in 1967, Black Skin, White Masks. That kind of notion of having to wear that mask of whiteness to gain access to these places. And it comes at a cost. So I think it would look, an ideal world would be one where we removed that requirement for people to code switch in order to gain access. And in order to do that, the institution would need to understand what they need to do to be welcoming and to be a place where people can come and be their authentic selves, rather than the person coming in needing to code switch in order to assimilate. So for me, that's where the work needs to happen. A lot more internal scrutiny within the industry and setting really clear targets about their own internal transformation.
Thank you. We have 20 minutes for questions. So please raise your hand clearly. Is that Nels? No. Yes, first question at the back there. We've got a roving mic.
Hi, Charlie Eastman. I'm a medical doctor, but my son's an actor. This is my daughter, by the way, who obviously wants to be involved.
Hello.
This is Amber.
Hi, Amber.
Can I ask a panel question? So I recently watched the Watch Ryan Murphy production, and what was very evident was the way that he'd chosen the casting. So he had a black female investigator, he had a black technical guy and all of that. So I think that was very conscious decisions on Ryan Murphy's part. Do you think that in terms of British production values, those same thoughts are put in to say, I've got a production, I've got so many roles, I will purposely ensure that a certain number of them are diverse?
Thank you. Who'd like to answer that question? It feels like a Clint or Adjoa inside the industry question.
Yeah, so I'd say there's a lot of efforts that are being made to answer an issue. And I suppose that's kind of what I was trying to allude to at the beginning, where it feels like it's to answer an issue. And the thinking isn't deep enough. So the problem or the issue gets held at casting as opposed to at writing, at the idea, at the beginning. As an actor of my age who have had to play loads of roles which I haven't been satisfied playing because I couldn't really say I was feeling like I was playing a black person. Mm-hmm. My accent was all screwy. I'd have to observe things that I know that as a black person would just be really strange. And you try and introduce that, and you couldn't. There is never the room to introduce it, to add a flavour of my black experience inside those pieces of works. I find problematic. However, obviously, I love acting, so you always try and find a way to do the best you can within that parameter. But yes, there are efforts. The efforts are usually being made in a way that means you just tell the story. So you're always just pushing story along. So the character doesn't ever feel rounded, feel whole, and I don't know. My thing is that I kind of cheaply, or is it cheaply? I think as an actor, this is cheaply. I do want to make my black audience happy. And I think my black audience want to see a character that's rounded. And so I always end up leaving with a little bit of a bitter taste in my mouth that I don't know if I've actually fulfilled that. I'll let you carry on.
That kind of speaks to what Nova was saying about, we have the paucity of the representation means we have to be all things to all people. Everything has to tick. Everybody has to be happy. And the pressure is too much pressure. It's too much pressure. We should be able to just make the work. And some of it will, you know, appeal to this audience of colour and this audience of colour and, you know, all audiences, and some of it will hit and some of it will miss. But we deserve the right to fail.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, come on. To your question, Amber's dad, I just two recent things. So, three recent things. So, there's a TV company. They want to make a show with me. I love, you know, I love crime drama. I love the crime drama of, say, Walter Mosley, where it actually tells you about the black migration coming up from the South, where it tells you about the development of the black community of Los Angeles. It tells you about what it is to be a 19-year-old man up to a 60-something-year-old man and all the baggage, pets, past relationships, children, whatever, that goes with that, while giving you a stonking, fantastic crime story and whodunit. I love that form. So I was very interested in this company. I was like, crime drama with me, great. And I was just, yes, I'd love to do that. But basically what they wanted was Brown Vera. And I said, I'm not doing Brown Vera. Blenda Blethyn's already done White Vera. You don't need me to do Brown Vera. I want to tell stories where I go home to my Ghanaian father and I talk about stuff. I want to tell stories where we have the conversation about what is it if you are born here and your parents are born somewhere else, and their sense of themselves from where they come, like for my dad, you know, street sweeper to president, everyone looks like my dad. You know, whereas here we're like, hello, can I please? Is that all right? Yes, I'll send them to Rwanda, those stinky brown people. Go on, you lot, because I'm not one of them. You know, all that sort of Braverman craziness. So I want the stories that are the whole human being. I want, you know, I am more than my genitalia and my melanin. Yes. You know, I'm a unique human soul. And there may be some things that in a free and, you know, the sunny uplands of my dreams of how we'd live together, you know, I may bond with a posh, eaten, educated white bloke over something that we both love. Ceramics, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It's like I want to have the choice to be a unique, individuated soul. And I live in a society that does not let me do that. So how do I try to hold on to that choice while also going, excuse me, when you like my skin, I am not the same colour as my blonde compadre. We are allowed into spaces that are not spaces that are set up to think of us as being part of the standard. You know, we are always slightly aberrant, whether we're being, oh yes, come in, more diversity, that's really lovely. That's a really interesting experience, yeah. And you want to go, yeah, my boiler blew up. Did your boiler blow up? It happens to all of us. So I want the space for us to be quotidian. You know, I want to be able to be, I did a TED talk about one of my kids who's trans. I want to be able to have that conversation just as a parent. You know, it's got nothing to do with my gender or my race. In that moment, I'm just somebody that wants their kid to thrive. How do I do that? So it's about finding they say intersectionality. I say just it's life, like we're complicated. It's finding those spaces that will allow us the freedom to be the entirety of who we are in the extraordinary and the very dull and everything in between. You know, I want to do the crime thing, but I want to do it so you get the whole experience of who I am. And I've run out of cocoa butter. Oh my God. And now I've got to... Do you know what I mean? It's just like... Well, it's the thing.
And arguably, does that mean that has to come in, does that have to happen via the writers?
Yes.
In the sense that, do they have to be black writers? So then you kind of go, as an actor, I go and do research. I'm always mystified by this, I have to say. In the way that writers, you know, you have this thing of, no, you can't touch the writer, you know, let the writer just write from the heart and write their experience. As an actor, I go and do research. If I'm writing something, I'm going to do research, I go find out about it. If I know there's going to be black people in my series, when it gets to casting, go and research some black people.
Do you know what? In the 80s,
You know what I mean?
EastEnders, early EastEnders, they would have, they started by late 80s to get black writers in.
Right.
That's when I was in it. And but they would not they wouldn't let the black writers write the white characters because they wouldn't
understand.
And you want to go, do you know what? If you're in a minority in any society, you are like this the whole time. You know everything because you have to know what to avoid, what to lean into, what to agree with, what to step back from. The black writers could write everybody because they had to do the lived experience of everybody to navigate their own lives.
But ultimately, it's asking for better writers.
Curious writers.
Curious writers. There you go. Better and better.
And just listening to you as a writer and as a viewer, you know when it's not authentic. You can just tell. It's just a lower quality story. When the person isn't 360 degrees in the way that you're describing, doesn't have a full emotional experience, it's annoying to watch. You can feel that the person writing this character hasn't really got under the skin of this character. So it's also just a basic question of quality, really. Thank you guys so much. Gentlemen here, and then here. Can I have a show of hands just to get a sense of how many more questions there are? Okay, cool. If you haven't got your hand up now and you change your mind, I might not be able to come to you. I'm just warning you. Oh.
Should I stand up or should...
It's up to you, however you feel more comfortable.
Okay, my name is Bisi Alimi, and my question is actually around this and around Bridgerton, which I find very fascinating. And you were talking about code switching, and I just want to know, how did you feel having to play in that kind of setting, in a historical setting in Britain that would have been white people, and then you're put into that role to speak in a particular way, to act in a particular way, to perform in a particular way, practically code switch. How was that experience for you? And do you think it could be something that we can put side by side with Black James Bond?
Several things. There were black people here then, first of all. Queen Charlotte, many historians agree she's descended from Alfonso III of Portugal and an African woman, maybe from the Royal House of Benin, maybe from North Africa. Portugal was trading from the 1400s right across above and sub-Saharan Africa. And if you look at paintings of the time, there's a painter called Alan Ramsey. Alan Ramsey paints Queen Charlotte, and you see the colour that Queen Charlotte is, you see the features that Queen Charlotte has, unlike many other portraitists of the time who painted her white. When she came to this country, they complained about her mulatto skin, they complained about her ugly thick lips, and they complained about her ugly wide nose. And there were concerns about what the offspring were going to look like. So that all is, that's just true. African people from royal and upper class families often, and from India, often sent their children to be educated in this country in this period. There was in Montgomeryshire, Nathaniel Wells in the late 1700s. He was the child of a slave owner, William Wells, and an enslaved woman, Georgine Wells. He inherited his father's estate. He went to Eton. He was the deputy of great swathes of Monmouthshire. He had 22 children by 2 wives, God love them. Those 22 children went into the high society of Wales and coming over into England. We existed, we've always existed. When people go from here unto other countries and do unto us, you know, there's a reciprocal relationship that happens. So I know Bridgerton isn't a searing, you know, forensic documentary about early Regency life. It's a piece of, you know, but the point is, the provocation for me that goes, yes, you know, so I absolutely, violently disagree with that term colour-blind casting. It is offensive on so many levels. But the number one being, it denies, when you say it's colour-blind casting, you deny me my race. I am playing the colour that you see. And there's a prequel coming and you'll understand about where Lady Danbury comes from and all sorts of things. But I'm playing the colour that you see. In terms of the creation of the character, she's my mother, who is English, white. She is my aunt, my Auntie Grace, who in the 60s left Accra with empty suitcases to go to Paris, Milan, New York, London, to buy fashion, because she wanted the latest fashions in her boutique in Accra. And she can still look at you and go, come tomorrow, I will have it for you. She can just see you. And so Lady Danbury is my mother, and she's both my grandmothers, the one that played guitar in a palm corps orchestra in Cape Coast in the 1920s, in her fabulous outfits. My father's earliest memory is of his mother singing to him with her guitar in the early 30s. So she's in there too. And my English grandmother, who gave birth to my mother in the basement of the Salvation Army Hospital in Liverpool during an air raid in 1941. They're hard, those women. They are tough. They love you fiercely. They have their own lights. They love fashion. They love a drink. They love telling stories. They love their friends. And everybody will know women like that in their lives. Everybody will have an auntie, a mother's friend, whatever, of every culture and every society. So I wanted to bring all of those things. And the Lady Danbury that you see is my choice and my creation. That cane she holds, she has a palanquin on that case for on that cane for a chief. So when I hold that cane, I hold Africa. You know, it's like there's little things.
Thank you, Adjoa. Thank you for the question. I knew we were going to get a Lady Danbury question. had to happen. That was a beautiful response. Yes, hello.
Oh, hi. My name is, sorry, apologies. My name is Kalunji Sebandake, Prospective Bond. So, very briefly, as a young actor, I was studying The White Devil by John Webster. And in this particular production, this printed play, Josette Simon played Victoria, who is famously a white character, the White Devil. And seeing an image of Josette Simon playing Victoria as a 16-year-old inspired me and gave me the confidence to pursue a career as an actor, a classical actor. And I've just played Othello, for example, The Watermill. Similarly, David Oyelowo playing Henry VI in the year 2000. So I guess my question to you, the panel, Clint, of course, Adjoa, Noma, and anyone else, is don't you think having a black Bond could have the same impact on a young black actor, black actress, that seeing Josette Simon as Victoria in The White Devil, a Jacobean play, and also reading David Oyelowo's diary about his experience playing Henry VI at the RSC. Thank you.
Thank you. Who'd like to answer that? Go ahead, Clint.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what I was saying about David Harewood. Opportunity is king, you could argue. You could argue. But again, it just depends on the efforts that are made to really hold that actor to be able to, as you said, to be able to be successful in playing that part and not have all the haters and be looked after in a 360 way to make that land. I think it's the pressure is unimaginable to play something like James Bond. That's for a white actor. To then put a black actor into that situation, for me, I think it'd be a lot. I just hope that we can be a bit more imaginative. So I think they tried that. They did try that with Lashana, in the sense of trying to confound us a bit. You know, and it looked like, oh gosh, there is a black James Bond, and they put it into the story. Those sort of efforts, I think, might be more successful. If we were to actually have a 006, a 008, a 0010, I mean, that's the idea, that there's loads of agents, isn't there? Mm-hmm. It's not just one agent. Why can't we just have our own agent? You know what I mean? Why do we have to have their agent? We have our own one that has the same budget. Do you know what I mean? That's what it's about, isn't it? We've got to remember that those things make the difference. You know, that's what I'd like to see.
I'm going to rattle through the questions. So we have a few and we're running out of time. Thank you so much. Thank you for the question. Yes. Hello. Here in the front. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say this is so incredible. Thank you. I'm sure everyone will agree that this panel is just like gold dust, and there's so much. Yeah, you can just feel the depth of knowledge, and it feels like we're only like touching the surface of what's there, and it's incredible. I was thinking about this question of, looking at politics, which, it's a depressing time. But we have this shining example of, as we've been saying, kind of briefly, representation, how it can fail. And I'm wondering, how do we create something where representation or people who ascend in this system, as we've established, which is unjust, those people that ascend actually are tethered to their community and are the people that can tell our stories in a way which is authentic and true and isn't just I'm at the top and I'm going to kick everyone else down. Like, what does it mean for us to create that? Is it about accountability? Is it about those types of groups that we were talking about in the 80s? I'm interested in how we do that, because it seems like, especially in Britain, it's difficult.
Thank you so much. I'm hearing notes of quasi-quarteng in the room. Who would like to answer that?
I like to try and answer a bit of it and then open the floor up. There's two things. I think accountability is key. I think we don't see accountability role modelled well. Now, the late Bell Hooks talks about love in action and how we hold the tension of having really, really challenging conversations with people, not always, but who are in a level of intimacy with us, and to be able to hold the tension of that and to hold people accountable. And also hold the heartbreak of, we don't all have the same values, we don't all have the same goal or alignment in thinking, and there will always be people who favour personal and professional advancement above doing stuff for the community. And so for me, it's holding the heartbreak of that. But I do think there's something around being able to role model accountability and to be able to consistently do it, because I find it harder to hold other black folk accountable for the harms that they enact or the choices that they make that can cause harm. I find it far harder to do that than I do holding a person racialised as white accountable when they're doing something harmful. So I'm just giving a little bit of something there, but I think accountability is key, but also being able to hold the reality that we don't all want the same things. And that's also part of what we're advocating for, that we're treated as full human beings. And that means we don't all want the same things.
Thank you. Go on, Harry.
Thanks. So, great question. I think one of the stories that we're told repeatedly is that of the individual hero, woman, man, any gender. That is the story we're told, whether that be Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Mandela, whoever. And actually, the real changes that we've seen in history have occurred within movements. So many of you by now will know that Rosa Parks wasn't an old lady who was tired and couldn't be bothered to get up, but was someone who was part of a movement where it was a planned, coordinated action. I think she was 36, who was also working in gender politics. And that's just an example of, we hear the story of Rosa Parks as this individual. She was connected up, undertaking a connected action. So I kind of think the message really, there are two elements. One is, there is no individual action that brings about the kind of radical shifts we've seen in history. And secondly, the incremental change seldom brings about the kinds of progress that we think we're going to achieve. It's always a trade-off that we can kind of get access to a little bit of power as long as we can maintain the status quo. And collective action leads to activism, which disrupts the norm. And that actually is what we need to do.
I'm afraid we're out of time. Sorry, I know there are a few of you who want to ask questions, but I would like to invite Leon. Are you here, Leon? From Show Racism, the Red Card, to give us our closing remarks. you.
Good evening, everyone.
There you are.
Very nice and humble to be among some greatness, black excellence here. So I'm from Show Racism Red Card. We are a charity, anti-racism charity, that go into schools and try and break down the narratives that are placed upon our youth. We also go into workplaces and we're trying to change the mindset of the kids and adults with regards to racism and how it affects people. So the charity started with Shaka Hislop, who was a goalkeeper for Newcastle United. And coming from a game, he went to a petrol station and a bunch of kids were racially abusing him from about 30 yards. Now, they didn't know who it was, they couldn't see him. But as they got closer, they realised who it was. And obviously, they asked for his autograph. Because they felt it was normal to racially abuse someone who was black. But then when they see him, that was their hero. So he decided to come up with a charity in order to go into schools and educate these young kids. So that's what we do on a daily basis. We also go into workplaces. And it's funny because obviously we all know that racism is a learned behaviour, right? It's something that you're not. No one is born a racist. You are taught these behaviours. So we're trying to break down the mindset and alter the mindset with correct information. Because all we can do is give out information, and then it's up to people to do what they want with that information. So please wear your bands and your badges, and try and broaden your mindset, because we've been conditioned from a long time, and we need to break down these conditions and try and look outside the box. That's it.
You've been an awesome audience. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to my phenomenal panel. This has been a really enlightening thing. Thank you, Afua. Have a good weekend.